The moment my daughter-in-law demanded $30,000 in rent at Thanksgiving dinner, I honestly thought she was joking. Then Vanessa slid a blue folder across the table and smiled while my own son refused to look me in the eyes. Inside were documents claiming I had agreed to pay them rent to live in the house my late husband and I bought 42 years ago. And at the bottom of the page was my signature. A signature I never wrote. My hands started shaking so badly, I dropped my wine glass right there beside the turkey Richard used to carve every Thanksgiving before he died. That was the moment I realized my family hadn't invited me to dinner. They had invited me to a setup. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved, I want you to stay with me for this story. And please tell me in the comments, what would you have done if your own child sat there in silence while someone tried to steal your home? Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy emotional family dramas like this, and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there tonight. Before that Thanksgiving dinner shattered whatever was left of my trust, I truly believed I was one of the lucky ones. After my husband Richard died, people warned me that grief changed families. They told me children became distant, that widows often ended up forgotten once the casseroles stopped arriving and the sympathy cards disappeared. But my son Ethan had wrapped his arms around me at Richard's funeral and whispered, "You're not alone, Mom. I'll take care of you now." I believed him. Lord help me. I believed every word. Richard and I had been married for 43 years. We met when I was 19 and working the front desk at a dental office in Columbus, Ohio. He was awkward patient and the kind of man who always carried extra batteries, extra flashlights, and extra cash just in case. He used to joke that he prepared for disasters because he married a woman who trusted everybody. And maybe he was right. Richard built our house with his own hands alongside his father and brothers in 1984. Not literally every nail, of course, but enough that every room carried his fingerprints somehow. The kitchen cabinets still had a tiny scratch where he slipped while installing them. The back porch leaned slightly because Richard insisted he could eyeball measurements better than a professional. Every Thanksgiving, he carved the turkey in the same spot beside the dining room window. Every Christmas, he hung lights even after his knees started giving out. Every spring, he planted tulips because I once casually mentioned they reminded me of my mother. That house wasn't just property, it was my entire life. When Richard died from a stroke at 72, the silence inside those walls nearly swallowed me whole. For months, I slept on only one side of the bed because I couldn't bear rolling over and touching cold sheets where he should have been. Sometimes I would hear the garage door in my dreams and wake up believing he had come home from the hardware store again. Then reality would hit me all over. The grief was physical, like drowning slowly. That was when Ethan stepped in. At first, he was wonderful. He started coming by every evening after work. He fixed little things around the house Richard normally handled. He brought groceries. He sat with me on the porch while I cried. Vanessa came too. Back then, I thought she was trying to love me. She brought homemade soups and called me Mom in that soft, sweet voice of hers. She hugged me often. She insisted I shouldn't be alone. "You need family around you," she told me one rainy evening while helping me fold laundry. That's what Richard would have wanted. Looking back now, I wonder how much of it was real. Or if she was studying my life the way a burglar studies a neighborhood before breaking into a home. About 6 months after Richard passed, Ethan brought up the idea of moving in. "It just makes sense financially," he explained over coffee one morning. "The market's terrible right now, and you shouldn't be here by yourself anyway." Vanessa immediately added, "We could help with bills, maintenance, cooking. It would be good for all of us." I hesitated at first, not because I distrusted them, but because I had spent decades building routines with Richard, and I wasn't ready for the house to feel different. Still, loneliness is dangerous. It makes you hand pieces of yourself away just to avoid silence. So I agreed. The first few months actually felt comforting. The house was alive again. I could hear footsteps upstairs, laughter from the television room, coffee brewing before sunrise, Ethan grilling in the backyard the way Richard used to. For a while, it almost felt like healing. Vanessa took over organizing household paperwork to make things easier. At the time, I appreciated it. After Richard handled finances for so many years, I often felt overwhelmed by bank statements, insurance forms, and utility bills. Vanessa seemed efficient and eager to help. "Don't stress yourself out over this stuff," she'd say, while sorting envelopes at the kitchen counter. "I'm good at paperwork." And she was. Too good. Slowly, things began changing in ways I barely noticed at first. Vanessa started collecting the mail before I woke up. Then she offered to manage online bill payments. Then she suggested putting certain accounts on auto pay so you won't accidentally miss anything. Whenever I asked questions, Ethan would smile and say, "Mom, she's helping you." Helping. That word became the answer to everything. Why did Vanessa need copies of the house deed she's helping? Why did she ask about Richard's life insurance payout she's helping? Why did she want access to the filing cabinet she's helping? One afternoon, I walked into the kitchen and stopped short when I saw Vanessa holding a folder labeled Property Tax Records. She flinched ever so slightly before smiling. "Oh, good," she laughed lightly. "I was actually looking for you." I remember feeling embarrassed for startling her in my own kitchen. That realization hurts now. A few weeks later, Ethan mentioned they were struggling financially. Apparently, a real estate investment had gone badly, something involving commercial property outside Cleveland. Ethan brushed past the details quickly, but I noticed Vanessa's jaw tighten during the conversation. "It's temporary," she said sharply. "We're figuring it out." After that, tension started creeping into the house like cold air through cracked windows. Late night arguments, whispered conversations stopping when I entered rooms, Vanessa spending money on designer bags, even while talking about financial stress. One night, I came downstairs for tea and heard Vanessa on the phone in the laundry room. "No, we just need more time," she hissed quietly. "The house is worth enough to cover everything." I froze. The house. Not our situation, not Ethan's business. The house. Before I could process what she meant, she walked out and nearly jumped when she saw me standing there. For one strange second, her expression looked almost guilty. Then it vanished behind that polished smile. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked sweetly. I nodded slowly. That same night, I went into Richard's old office looking for aspirin and noticed something else strange. The bottom drawer of the filing cabinet was slightly open. Richard never left drawers open, ever. Inside, several folders had clearly been moved around, and for the first time since my husband died, a terrible thought entered my mind. What if the people living in my house were not protecting me at all? What if they were preparing for something I didn't know it then, but Thanksgiving was already being planned, and I was about to walk straight into the cruelest betrayal of my life? After that night in Richard's office, I started noticing things I should have paid attention to months earlier. Little things. The kind of things that seem harmless until suddenly they connect together like pieces of broken glass. Vanessa always knew when my mail arrived before I did. Not sometimes. Always. If a bank statement came, she somehow already had it in her hands before I even walked to the mailbox. If I ordered medication, she brought the package inside before I heard the delivery truck leave the driveway. At first, I convinced myself she was simply organized, helpful, attentive. But once doubt enters your heart, it changes the way you see everything. One Monday morning, I woke up early and went downstairs for coffee before anyone else. I remember feeling strangely proud of myself for getting out of bed before sunrise. Since Richard died, mornings had become difficult. But as I passed the front window, I saw Vanessa outside wearing slippers and a long cream-colored robe, standing at the mailbox. She looked around before opening it. Then she quickly tucked several envelopes against her chest and hurried back inside. I stepped away before she saw me. A few seconds later, she entered through the kitchen door, carrying the mail like nothing unusual had happened. "Oh," she said brightly when she spotted me. "You're up early?" I forced a smile. "So are you." For just a second, something cold flickered across her face. Then it disappeared. "I was just trying to save you the trip outside," she replied sweetly. "Helping. Always helping." That afternoon, I realized I hadn't seen a single utility bill in months. Not one. Back when Richard was alive, I handled every paper bill personally. I kept folders color-coded inside the office cabinet, electric water insurance taxes. I knew exactly when everything arrived each month. Now suddenly, everything was online. Vanessa insisted paper billing was outdated. You shouldn't stress over paperwork anymore, she kept telling me. You deserve to relax. Relax. Funny how control is often stolen using comforting words. A few days later, I went to pay for groceries using my debit card, and the machine declined it. I laughed awkwardly and tried again. Declined. My cheeks burned while the teenage cashier avoided eye contact. I'm sure it's just fraud protection, I muttered while digging for another card. That card worked, but the embarrassment stayed with me long after I got home. When I asked Vanessa later whether she knew anything about the bank account issue, she answered too quickly. Oh, yes, the bank flagged suspicious activity last week. Ethan and I handled it. I stared at her. Handled it? How would you even know before I did? I asked carefully. She blinked once. Well, because your alerts go to the household email now. I never agreed to that. I knew I never agreed to that. But suddenly I found myself second-guessing my own memory. That frightened me more than anything. Widowhood already makes you feel unsteady. You lose your partner, your routines, your confidence. Some days I forgot where I placed my glasses or whether I'd taken my vitamins. So when Vanessa calmly explained things away, part of me wondered if maybe I really had forgotten conversations. Maybe I had signed things. Maybe grief had damaged me more than I realized. That's what manipulation does. It makes you distrust your own mind. The changes inside the house became more obvious after that. Vanessa changed the Wi-Fi password without telling me. I discovered it one afternoon while trying to video call my sister in Arizona. When I asked for the new password, Vanessa laughed lightly. Oh gosh, I thought Ethan gave it to you. Ethan barely looked up from his phone. It's just easier if Vanessa manages all the tech stuff, Mom. Again with that tone, like I was fragile, outdated, a burden. One evening, I overheard Vanessa talking to Ethan in the kitchen after they thought I'd gone upstairs. We can't keep waiting forever, she whispered sharply. I know, Ethan muttered. She still treats this place like it's hers. Silence. Then Ethan sighed heavily. It is hers. My heart stopped for a second. Vanessa lowered her voice even more, but I still heard it. Not if we do this right. I stood frozen halfway up the staircase, gripping the railing so tightly my knuckles hurt. Something inside me shifted that night. Not fully. Not enough to make me confront them, but enough to plant fear where trust used to live. The next morning, Vanessa acted perfectly normal. Too normal. She made blueberry pancakes and asked whether I wanted extra syrup. She complimented my sweater. She kissed Ethan goodbye at the door like some cheerful sitcom wife. Watching her felt surreal. How could someone sound so warm while saying such cold things behind closed doors? About 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, another strange thing happened. I was searching for my Medicare paperwork in the office when I found a large envelope tucked beneath several folders. My name was typed neatly across the front. Lori Myers. No return address. Inside was a legal-looking document covered in highlighted sections and sticky notes. At the top were the words, Property Occupancy Agreement. My stomach tightened instantly. I skimmed the first paragraph and felt my pulse begin hammering in my ears. The document referred to me as an occupant residing within the property under conditional family arrangement. Occupant, not homeowner. Occupant. I barely understood the rest because panic blurred the words together. Then I heard footsteps. I shoved the document back into the envelope seconds before Vanessa appeared in the doorway. There you are, she chirped. I've been looking everywhere for you. I tried to act calm. I was organizing some papers. Her eyes flicked toward the filing cabinet. For one uncomfortable moment, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled again. That smile. Perfectly polished. Perfectly false. You really shouldn't tire yourself out with all this paperwork, she said softly. Stress isn't good at your age. At your age. I suddenly heard the sentence differently than before. Not concern. Warning. That same week, Ethan started avoiding me almost completely. If I entered a room, conversations stopped. If I asked questions about bills or mail, he became defensive. One night, I finally cornered him in the garage while he was pretending to organize tools. Ethan, I said quietly, is something going on financially? He didn't answer immediately. Then he shrugged. Things are tight right now. How tight? He rubbed his face with both hands. You wouldn't understand. The words stung more than I expected. I raised you, I said softly. I think I can understand debt. His expression briefly softened. For 1 second, I saw my little boy again, the child who used to crawl into bed beside me during thunderstorms. But then the garage door opened and Vanessa walked in. Everything changed instantly. Ethan stepped back emotionally, like someone closing a door. We're handling it, he said flatly. Vanessa looped her arm through his. Don't worry, Lori, she said with that same sugary voice. We're all family here. Family. By then, the word no longer comforted me. It terrified me. Because deep down, I was starting to understand something awful. Richard had spent his entire life protecting me from strangers. But neither of us ever imagined I might one day need protection from the people living under our own roof. And Thanksgiving was only days away. The morning of Thanksgiving began with the smell of cinnamon, roasted turkey, and tension so thick I could practically taste it. I woke up before sunrise after barely sleeping at all. For hours, I had stared at the ceiling, listening to footsteps upstairs, and wondering whether I was losing my mind. Maybe Vanessa really was helping. Maybe grief had simply made me suspicious. But deep inside, another voice whispered something different. Richard trusted your instincts. Why don't you? I wrapped myself in my old cream cardigan and walked downstairs expecting quiet. Instead, the house already looked like a magazine spread. Vanessa had transformed everything overnight. Gold candles lined the dining table, tiny pumpkins decorated every windowsill, cloth napkins folded into perfect shapes sat beside polished wine glasses I hadn't used in years. Even the chandelier sparkled. It should have felt beautiful. Instead, it felt staged, artificial, like a hotel trying too hard to look like home. Vanessa stood in the kitchen, wearing an expensive rust-colored dress and full makeup at 7 in the morning. Happy Thanksgiving. She sang brightly when she saw me. She crossed the room and hugged me before I could react. Her perfume smelled sharp and floral, too strong. Sit down, she insisted. I'll make your coffee. I watched her move around my kitchen like she owned it. That thought unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. Ethan appeared a few minutes later, looking exhausted. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes, and he barely touched his breakfast. You okay? I asked gently. Just tired, he muttered. Vanessa answered for him before he could say anything else. He's been stressed about finances. Again. Always finances. Always stress. But somehow Vanessa still had perfect nails, new jewelry, and designer boots arriving at the front door every other week. By noon, relatives began arriving. My cousin Megan Collins came first, carrying sweet potato casserole and enough honesty to make Vanessa visibly uncomfortable. Megan had known me since childhood. She was the kind of woman who noticed things other people missed. The moment she hugged me, she pulled back slightly and frowned. You look pale, Lori. I'm fine, I lied. Her eyes drifted across the room toward Vanessa, then back to me. Are you sure? Before I could answer, Vanessa swept into the hallway with exaggerated warmth. Megan. Oh my gosh, come in. Megan smiled politely, but after 40 years of family gatherings, I recognized the tightness around her mouth. She sensed something too. Soon the house filled with noise. Football blared from the television. Glasses clinked. People laughed too loudly. Vanessa floated from room to room, playing perfect hostess, while Ethan grew quieter and quieter. And then I noticed someone I didn't recognize. A blonde woman in a navy pantsuit standing near the dining room holding a leather portfolio. Vanessa immediately walked over. "Oh, Lori," she said smoothly. "This is Cynthia Blake. She's helping Ethan and me with financial planning. Financial planning. On Thanksgiving." Cynthia shook my hand firmly. "It's lovely meeting you," she said in a voice that sounded overly professional for a holiday dinner. Something about her presence made my stomach tighten. Why would a financial consultant come to a family Thanksgiving? I looked toward Ethan silently asking for an explanation. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That frightened me more than anything else. The entire afternoon felt wrong after that. Not dramatic, not openly hostile, just wrong. Like everyone knew lines in a play except me. Vanessa kept disappearing into the dining room every 20 minutes. Each time she returned, she looked more energized. Excited almost. At one point, I walked past the dining table and noticed a large blue folder resting beside Vanessa's purse. The same folder from my nightmare later. At the time, I only noticed how thick it was, stuffed with papers. When Vanessa saw me looking at it, she casually placed a napkin over the top. That tiny movement sent ice through my chest. During dinner preparation, Megan cornered me quietly near the laundry room. "What's going on here?" she whispered. I blinked. "What do you mean?" She lowered her voice further. "Lori Ethan looks miserable. Vanessa looks like she's preparing for a board meeting, and there's some random businesswoman drinking wine in your dining room." I tried forcing a laugh. "You're imagining things." "No," Megan said firmly. "You are." The words hit me harder than she intended, because deep down, I knew she was right. Dinner itself began normally enough. The turkey sat in the center of the table, exactly where Richard used to carve it every year. That nearly broke me. For 43 Thanksgivings, Richard stood at that spot, telling terrible jokes while pretending to host cooking shows. Now Vanessa stood there instead. Perfect posture, perfect smile, perfect control. "Before we eat," she announced brightly, "I just want to say how grateful I am that family can support each other through hard times." Several people nodded. I felt Ethan tense beside me. Vanessa continued, "This year taught us that sacrifices have to be shared equally." Something inside me tightened. Shared equally. I suddenly realized everyone at the table had gone strangely quiet. Even the football game in the other rooms seemed distant. Vanessa sat down gracefully and rested one hand on the blue folder beside her chair, like she was waiting, preparing. I looked toward Ethan again. "Please," I thought silently, "say something." But my son stared at his plate. Throughout dinner conversation kept drifting toward money. Housing prices, retirement costs, medical expenses, almost as if Vanessa was steering the topic deliberately. Cynthia Blake occasionally chimed in with comments about financial accountability and modern family arrangements. The language sounded rehearsed, corporate, cold. I barely touched my food. Every instinct I had screamed that something terrible was coming. Then came dessert. Pumpkin pie. The same recipe my mother used for decades. Vanessa stood and tapped her wine glass lightly. "I actually wanted to discuss something important before everyone leaves," she said. The room immediately quieted. My heart started pounding. Vanessa smiled politely at the table. "Lori, first of all, we love you very much." That sentence alone terrified me. People rarely begin disasters without softening the ground first. Beside me, Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Vanessa reached for the blue folder. "I think it's time we talked honestly about the current living arrangement." The air disappeared from the room. I heard Megan shift uncomfortably across the table. Vanessa slowly opened the folder and removed several documents. "We've been extremely patient," she continued calmly, "but unfortunately, this situation has become financially unfair." I stared at her completely confused. What situation? Vanessa slid the papers toward me. The unpaid rent? For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I actually laughed softly because the statement sounded too absurd to process. "Rent," I repeated. Vanessa nodded sympathetically. "Yes. According to the occupancy agreement you signed 10 months ago." My fingers trembled as I looked down at the papers. There it was. My name, my address, legal language, dollar amounts, and at the bottom of the final page, my signature. The room tilted sideways. That's impossible, I whispered. Vanessa's expression hardened just slightly. You signed it willingly, Lori. I looked desperately at Ethan. He still wouldn't look at me, and suddenly I realized this Thanksgiving dinner had never been about family at all. It had been planned. Every chair, every guest, every smile, every word, all leading to this moment. I don't remember standing up from the table. One second I was staring at that signature, and the next I was gripping the edge of my chair because my knees no longer felt strong enough to hold me. The dining room had gone completely silent. No forks clinking, no football noise from the living room, nothing except the sound of my own breathing growing shallow and uneven. Vanessa sat perfectly calm across from me, one manicured hand resting on the stack of papers, like a lawyer presenting evidence in court. This says, I owe you rent, I asked weakly. My voice barely sounded like my own. Vanessa nodded sympathetically, almost as if this entire humiliation hurt her too. It was supposed to be temporary, she explained in that soft, rehearsed tone. But after 10 months, Ethan and I can't continue carrying the financial burden alone. Financial burden. I nearly laughed from disbelief. This house had been fully paid off for 13 years. Richard and I sacrificed vacations, new cars, and nights out to make sure of that. We pinched pennies while Ethan was growing up so one day we could retire without debt. And now this woman sat in my dining room pretending I was some freeloading tenant. I looked around the table desperately hoping someone would say this had gone too far. Megan looked horrified. My cousin's husband stared down into his lap uncomfortably. Ethan's uncle cleared his throat, but stayed silent. Nobody moved. Nobody defended me. Vanessa slowly pushed a printed spreadsheet toward me. We calculated everything carefully, she continued. $3,000 monthly for occupancy utilities, food expenses, and maintenance contributions. Occupancy. Not living, not family. Occupancy. The language felt deliberate, cold enough to erase love from the equation completely. I picked up the papers with shaking hands. The contract looked real, terrifyingly real. Typed paragraphs. Initials at the bottom of every page. My signature signed neatly in blue ink. Even the date looked believable. You forged this, I whispered. Vanessa immediately leaned back in her chair, wounded innocence spreading across her face. Lori, that's a very serious accusation. I turned toward Ethan so fast my neck hurt. Tell her this is insane. He rubbed both hands over his face before finally speaking. Mom? That single word cracked something inside me. Not because of what he said, because of how tired he sounded, like this conversation had already happened privately many times before tonight. You signed the agreement, he said quietly. No, I didn't. You probably just forgot. Forgot. The room spun. I stared at my own son, trying to understand who this man had become. Ethan, I said slowly, your father and I bought this house before you graduated high school. I know. It's my home. Vanessa interrupted before he could say anything else. Legally, it's more complicated than that. Megan suddenly slammed her fork onto the table. Oh, absolutely not, she snapped. Every head turned toward her. This woman buried her husband less than 2 years ago, Megan continued angrily. And you're publicly demanding rent at Thanksgiving dinner. Vanessa kept her composure impressively well. We're simply trying to resolve a financial issue respectfully. Respectfully, Megan barked. You ambushed her in front of the entire family. Vanessa's eyes hardened for the first time all evening. We didn't ambush anyone. Lori has ignored several attempts to discuss this privately. That's because nobody discussed it privately, I cried. My voice cracked so sharply, the room fell silent again. I held up the contract with trembling fingers. I never signed this. Vanessa exchanged a quick glance with Cynthia Blake. Then Cynthia finally spoke. As a financial consultant, she began carefully, I've reviewed the documentation and the signatures appear consistent. Consistent. The word made me physically ill because the signature truly did look like mine. I studied it again desperately, searching for proof that it wasn't real. But the curve of the L, the tail on the Y, even the pressure marks look correct. For one horrifying moment, doubt entered my mind. Had Vanessa slipped papers into stacks of documents months ago? Had I signed something without realizing? Was that possible? Vanessa noticed the uncertainty on my face immediately. Predators recognize weakness fast. You were grieving heavily at the time, she said gently. Nobody blames you for forgetting. That sentence changed everything, because suddenly I understood what she was doing. This wasn't just about money, it was about making me question my own mind. Around the table, relatives exchanged uncomfortable looks. I could practically feel them wondering whether age and grief had confused me, whether maybe poor Lori really had forgotten signing paperwork. That humiliation hurt more than the accusation itself. I spent my entire life being careful, responsible, organized, and now I was being transformed into a confused old woman right in front of everyone I loved. I looked at Ethan again, still hoping, still praying my son would stand up and stop this nightmare. Instead, he reached for the folder slowly. Mom, nobody wants this to become legal, he said quietly. We just need cooperation. Legal? Cooperation? Who talks to their mother this way? Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of Vanessa, never in front of her. What exactly do you want from me? I asked. Vanessa answered immediately. The $30,000 owed under the agreement. I don't have $30,000 sitting around. Well, Vanessa replied smoothly, there are other options. There it was, the real conversation. She removed another document from the folder and slid it across the table. This would allow temporary shared oversight of household finances until the debt is resolved. Shared oversight. I stared at the page. Power of attorney paperwork. My stomach dropped. Oh my God, Megan whispered. Now everyone at the table looked uncomfortable. Even Ethan seemed unable to fully meet my eyes anymore. Vanessa kept speaking calmly, confidently, like someone presenting a business proposal instead of dismantling an old woman's life. This would protect everyone involved, she explained, especially considering the confusion surrounding prior agreements. Confusion, again implying my memory couldn't be trusted. I suddenly remembered Richard's voice from years ago. Never sign anything without reading twice, Lori. My husband had always worried that my trusting nature would someday hurt me. At the time, I used to laugh about it. Now I felt cold all over. I'm not signing anything, I said quietly. Vanessa's expression tightened, only slightly, but enough for me to see the anger beneath her performance. Lori, she said patiently, we're trying to help you avoid unnecessary embarrassment. Embarrassment. As though she hadn't already humiliated me in front of everyone I loved. Then Ethan finally looked directly at me, and what I saw in his face nearly destroyed me. Not cruelty, not hatred, fear. My son looked terrified. Not of me, of her. That realization shook me deeply. Before I could process it, Vanessa leaned forward. If we can't settle this privately, she said softly, we may have to consider court involvement. Court. The word landed like a gunshot. I looked around my dining room, at Richard's old chair, at the family photos on the walls, at the turkey platter he used every Thanksgiving, and suddenly, I no longer felt like the owner of this house. I felt like prey. Vanessa smiled politely and folded her hands together. We really hope you'll do the right thing. That was the exact moment I understood something terrifying. This woman had not impulsively embarrassed me at dinner. She had planned every second carefully. The guests, the witnesses, the documents, the pressure, even my confusion. And somehow, my own son had helped her do it. I barely remember how Thanksgiving dinner ended. People left awkwardly carrying leftovers in silence while avoiding eye contact with me. The same relatives who had laughed around my table an hour earlier now moved through the house like strangers trapped inside an uncomfortable accident. Nobody knew what to say. And honestly, neither did I. Megan hugged me tightly near the front door before leaving. "This isn't right," she whispered fiercely into my ear. "Don't sign a damn thing." I nodded, but my body felt numb. Across the room, Vanessa was calmly packing pie slices into plastic containers as if she hadn't just destroyed my entire sense of safety. That image still haunts me sometimes. How normal she looked afterward, as though humiliating me publicly was no more emotional than balancing a checkbook. Once the guests finally disappeared, silence settled over the house like smoke after a fire. Ethan stood near the sink, staring down at nothing, while Vanessa gathered wine glasses. I remained seated at the dining table because I honestly didn't trust my legs enough to stand. The blue folder still sat in front of me, mocking me. Every time I glanced at that signature, nausea twisted inside my stomach. Finally, I looked at my son. "Tell me the truth," I whispered. Ethan closed his eyes. "Mom?" "No." My voice cracked sharply. "Look at me and tell me the truth." "Did you know about this?" Vanessa answered before he could. "Of course he did. We discussed this together like responsible adults." Responsible adults. The phrase hit me like a slap. I stood slowly gripping the table edge for balance. "You sat there while your wife accused me of owing rent in my own home?" "It's not that simple," Ethan muttered. "Then explain it to me." He rubbed both hands over his face again, something he'd started doing constantly over the past few months. "You don't understand how bad things are financially. So you decided to steal from me?" Vanessa's head snapped upward instantly. "Nobody is stealing anything." I turned toward her. For the first time all night, I truly looked at my daughter-in-law. Not the polished smiles, not the sweet voice, not the performance. I looked underneath it, and what I saw chilled me. There was no guilt in her eyes, only irritation that I wasn't cooperating. "You forged documents," I said quietly. Vanessa folded her arms. "You're upset right now, Lori. I understand that. That isn't an answer." Her expression hardened slightly. "The agreement exists. Whether you remember signing it or not doesn't change reality." That sentence was deliberate, again pushing the idea that my memory couldn't be trusted. Ethan finally spoke up louder. "Mom, please stop making this harder than it has to be." I stared at him in disbelief. "Harder for who? For them?" My chest hurt so badly, I thought for a moment I might actually faint. "I buried your father less than 2 years ago," I whispered. "Do you have any idea what this is doing to me?" Something flickered across Ethan's face then. Shame, pain, maybe even regret. But Vanessa stepped closer beside him and it vanished immediately. "We're trying to secure everyone's future," she said smoothly. "No," I replied. "You're trying to take my house? That's ridiculous." "Then why the power of attorney papers?" Vanessa didn't answer right away. That silence told me more than words could have. I looked toward Ethan again desperately. "Did you really think I'd sign those?" His voice dropped almost to a whisper. "We thought maybe you'd understand eventually." "Understand." I laughed then, a broken, exhausted laugh that barely sounded human. "You think I should understand being treated like I'm senile?" "No one said senile," Vanessa snapped quickly. "You didn't have to." The room went silent again. Outside, snow had started falling lightly beyond the dining room windows. Richard used to love the first snow of the season. The memory almost destroyed me right there. Vanessa gathered the remaining documents and slid them neatly back into the blue folder. "You should get some rest," she said calmly. "This conversation can continue tomorrow when emotions are lower." My own house suddenly felt unfamiliar, like I was standing inside someone else's life. I turned and walked upstairs without another word because I knew if I stayed one more minute, I would completely fall apart in front of them. The second my bedroom door closed, I collapsed onto the floor beside the bed, not crying, not at first, just shaking, My entire body trembled so violently I could barely breathe. I looked around the bedroom Richard and I had shared for decades. His reading glasses still sat on the nightstand, exactly where he left them, before the stroke that killed him. His winter coat still hung in the closet because I hadn't found the strength to move it yet. Everything in that room reminded me of safety, of love. And downstairs sat two people, trying to convince me that I no longer owned the life Richard and I built together. That realization finally broke me. I cried harder that night than I had at Richard's funeral, because grief is terrible. But betrayal by your own child feels like mourning someone still alive. At some point after midnight, I heard soft footsteps outside my bedroom door. A hesitant knock followed. Mom, Ethan. I wiped my face quickly, but didn't answer immediately. Another knock. Mom, please. Finally, I opened the door halfway. Ethan stood there looking exhausted and pale. For one brief second, he looked like my little boy again. I didn't want tonight to happen like that, he said quietly. Then why did it? He looked downstairs before answering. We're in trouble? What kind of trouble? His jaw tightened. Debt. How much a lot? I stared at him. How much, Ethan? He swallowed hard. Over 200,000. The number nearly took my breath away. What? The investment collapsed, he admitted. Then credit cards, loans, things spiraled. I leaned against the doorframe for support. Oh my God. He looked miserable. I thought we could fix it. By taking my house? No, he snapped suddenly. Then his voice softened again. Not take it. Just leverage it temporarily. I almost couldn't comprehend the words coming out of his mouth. Your father worked 40 years for this home. I know. You think he would have wanted this? Ethan looked away instantly. That answer alone told me everything. Then came the sentence that truly terrified me. Vanessa says if we don't solve this soon, we could lose everything. Vanessa says, not I think. Not we believe? Vanessa says. My son sounded less like a husband and more like a frightened man following orders. Ethan, I whispered carefully, did Vanessa create those documents? He froze, just for a second, but it was enough. Fear flashed across his face so quickly most people would have missed it. I can't talk about this right now, he muttered. My heart sank, because innocent people deny accusations immediately. Guilty people panic. Before I could ask another question, Vanessa's voice echoed from downstairs. Ethan, his entire posture changed instantly. Tension, obedience, anxiety. I have to go, he said quickly. Then he looked at me one last time, and for the first time since Richard died, I saw something in my son's eyes that made me truly afraid. Not greed, not anger, weakness, the kind that destroys families. After he left, I locked my bedroom door for the very first time in 43 years of living in that house. And as I lay awake, listening to the muffled sound of Vanessa talking downstairs, one horrifying realization kept repeating inside my mind. This wasn't over. Thanksgiving had only been the beginning. I waited until nearly 3 in the morning before leaving my bedroom. The house was finally quiet. No footsteps upstairs. No murmured conversations. No sound except the old grandfather clock near the staircase ticking steadily through the darkness. For the first time in my own home, I moved carefully, silently, like an intruder. That realization alone nearly broke my heart. I wrapped Richard's old flannel robe tighter around myself and walked downstairs toward the basement door. My hands trembled so badly, I almost dropped the flashlight twice. The basement smelled exactly the way it always had: cold concrete, dust, old wood, and faint traces of Richard's motor oil from projects he never quite finished. I hadn't been down there since the funeral. Not really. Grief had turned the basement into sacred ground somehow. Too many memories lived there. Richard humming while organizing tools. Richard fixing Christmas decorations. Richard labeling storage bins with his terrible handwriting. And somewhere down there sat the old steel safe he never let anyone touch except me. You never know when paperwork saves lives, he used to joke. At the time, I rolled my eyes every single time he said it. Now those words echoed in my head differently. I reached the back wall and crouched beside the safe hidden behind old paint cans and storage boxes. The combination still came to me instantly. Richard's birthday, our anniversary, Ethan's birth year. The lock clicked open. The sound felt strangely loud in the darkness. Inside sat folders, legal envelopes, jewelry boxes, old photographs, and several stacks of neatly organized documents. Richard's entire life reduced to paper. My chest tightened painfully. For a few seconds, I just sat there staring into the safe, while memories crashed over me. Richard dancing with me barefoot in the kitchen. Richard crying when Ethan graduated high school. Richard holding my hand in the hospital 2 weeks before he died, whispering, "You're stronger than you think, Lori." Tears blurred my vision. "I hope you were right," I whispered aloud. Then I noticed the envelope. Cream-colored. My name written across the front in Richard's handwriting. "Lori, if anyone ever questions the house, open this immediately." The blood drained from my face. Slowly, I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and several official-looking documents clipped together. I recognized the first document instantly. The original deed to our house. Not a copy. The original. My hands shook as I read through it carefully under the flashlight beam. The property belonged solely to Richard and me. No transfer. No amendment. No shared ownership. Nothing involving Ethan or Vanessa whatsoever. I let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Vanessa had lied. Completely. Then I unfolded Richard's letter. "Lori, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong. I pray it hasn't, but I know people change when money and fear enter their lives, especially after loss. Please remember this house is fully protected under your ownership. No transfer can occur without multiple legal confirmations and direct attorney oversight. Do not sign anything under pressure. And if Ethan is involved somehow, remember something important. Weak people can be manipulated into doing terrible things. That doesn't excuse them, but it may explain them. Call Harold Bennett immediately. He knows everything." I stared at the page for a very long time. My husband knew, not specifically, but somehow Richard had sensed this possibility years before it happened. A fresh wave of grief hit me so hard I bent forward against the safe, trying not to sob loudly enough to wake the house. Even dead Richard was still trying to protect me. Meanwhile, our son— I couldn't even finish the thought. Inside the envelope sat another smaller folder labeled Property Security Documentation. I opened it carefully. There were copies of legal protections, notarized records, and several handwritten notes from Richard explaining the structure of our estate. One sentence caught my attention immediately. Any attempt to transfer authority through non-verified secondary documents should be treated as potential fraud. Fraud. Not misunderstanding. Not confusion. Fraud. My stomach turned cold. I suddenly realized something terrifying. Vanessa hadn't merely manipulated Ethan emotionally, she had planned this carefully, professionally. Then I found another note clipped to the back. Harold's private number. I almost called immediately, despite the hour. Instead, I forced myself to breathe slowly. Think clearly, Lori. For the first time since Thanksgiving dinner, panic began giving way to something else. Awareness. I wasn't confused. I wasn't senile. I wasn't imagining things. Someone had forged documents involving my home, and deep down, I already knew who. I spent nearly an hour searching through the safe after that. Most of it contained ordinary things, tax records, insurance policies, family photos. Then I found another strange folder. Inside were photocopies of Ethan's old financial records from years earlier. Several pages had Richard's handwriting in the margins. Concerned about impulsive decisions, needs accountability, trustworthy heart, weak judgment. I sat back against the basement wall, stunned. Richard had worried about Ethan for much longer than I realized, not because our son was cruel, because he was easily influenced. That hurt in a completely different way. Growing up, Ethan always wanted approval desperately. From teachers, friends, coaches, girlfriends. He hated conflict so much he'd agree with whoever spoke loudest in the room. Richard used to tell him, a man who can't say no becomes dangerous eventually. At the time, Ethan laughed it off. Now I understood exactly what Richard meant. Weakness creates openings for stronger personalities to take control. And Vanessa controlled every room she entered. Suddenly, dozens of moments from the past year rearranged themselves inside my memory. Vanessa answering questions for Ethan, Vanessa controlling finances, Vanessa deciding conversations, Vanessa steering every situation while Ethan nervously followed behind her. I remembered the fear in his eyes upstairs after Thanksgiving dinner. Not just guilt, fear. Fear of failing her, fear of what happened if he disobeyed. Still, fear didn't excuse what they had done to me. Nothing could. As I prepared to close the safe, one final detail caught my attention. A thin manila folder partially hidden beneath the others. Inside sat copies of notarized signatures. Mine? Richard's? Ethan's. Why would Richard keep those? Then understanding hit me slowly. Signature verification. My husband anticipated the possibility of fraud years ago. The man truly prepared for everything. I carefully compared my authentic signatures to the one Vanessa presented at dinner. At first glance, they looked identical, but after several minutes, I noticed tiny differences. The pressure marks were slightly too smooth. The curve beneath the Y tilted differently. It was good, extremely good, but it wasn't mine. A cold wave of rage finally replaced fear. Not explosive rage, worse, quiet rage. The kind that sharpens instead of burns. Vanessa had counted on me doubting myself, counted on grief making me vulnerable, counted on age making others question my memory, and maybe worst of all, she counted on Ethan staying weak enough to help her. I carefully returned everything to the safe except Richard's letter and Harold Bennett's number. Then I locked the safe again. As I climbed the basement stairs, dawn light was beginning to appear faintly through the kitchen windows. The house looked peaceful, normal. But now I saw it differently. This was no longer simply my home. It was a battlefield. And for the first time since Richard died, I finally understood I was going to have to fight. The morning after I opened Richard's safe, I made myself do something very difficult. I acted normal, or at least I tried to. Vanessa was already in the kitchen when I came upstairs. She stood at the counter, blending one of those green smoothies she suddenly became obsessed with after watching health influencers online. She smiled brightly when she saw me. "Good morning, Lori." The sound of my name in her mouth made my skin crawl now. Still, I forced a polite smile. "Morning." I watched her carefully while pouring coffee. Had she slept peacefully after what she did to me? Had she gone to bed feeling victorious? The thought filled me with quiet disgust. Ethan entered a few minutes later, looking exhausted again. His eyes darted toward me nervously before settling on the floor. "Morning, Mom?" "Morning." That was it. No apology, no explanation, just tension hanging between us like smoke. Vanessa handed him a mug and casually rested her hand on his shoulder. The gesture looked affectionate on the surface, but now I noticed something else underneath it. Control. Almost like she was reminding him silently to behave. "I think we should revisit our conversation later today," Vanessa said lightly, while sipping her smoothie. My stomach tightened instantly. "There's nothing to revisit," I replied calmly. "I'm not signing anything." Her smile thinned slightly. "Well, we all need to be realistic." Realistic. Another one of her favorite words. I didn't respond. Instead, I quietly carried my coffee into the living room and sat beside the window where Richard used to read newspapers every morning. Snow covered the backyard in a thin white layer now. Everything looked peaceful outside. Inside, I felt like I was living beside enemies. Around noon, Vanessa announced she was going shopping with Ethan. I noticed Ethan looked surprised by the plan. Right now, he asked. "Yes," she replied quickly. We need to pick up a few things. He hesitated, then nodded. Of course he did. Before leaving, Vanessa grabbed the blue folder from the kitchen counter and tucked it into her oversized handbag. That folder again. My eyes followed it instinctively. For a split second, Vanessa noticed, and she smiled. Not warmly, triumphantly. The second their car disappeared down the street, I moved. Fast. My pulse hammered so hard I could barely think straight. I knew I was taking a risk, but I also knew opportunities like this wouldn't happen often. Vanessa guarded those documents obsessively, which meant there were probably more hidden somewhere. I started in the downstairs office first. Nothing obvious. Then the kitchen drawers, mostly bills and coupons. Finally, I went upstairs into the guest bedroom Vanessa had quietly turned into her workspace months earlier. Even entering the room felt invasive. But then I remembered Thanksgiving dinner, and my guilt disappeared instantly. The room smelled like expensive perfume and scented candles. A sleek white laptop sat on the desk beside stacked folders and a wireless printer. Everything looked neat. Too neat. Vanessa liked appearances controlled perfectly. I searched carefully. Desk drawers, cabinets, file organizers. Nothing incriminating at first. Then I noticed a small lockbox tucked beneath the desk. Locked. Of course. I nearly gave up until I remembered Vanessa's habit of hiding spare keys inside decorative containers. Sure enough, inside a ceramic vase sat a tiny silver key. My hands trembled as I opened the lockbox. Inside were several folders: credit card statements, loan notices, past due payment warnings. My breath caught in my throat. The debt situation was far worse than Ethan admitted. Far worse. There were notices stamped "Final Warning," collections letters, legal threats. One paper showed over $90,000 owed on a single business loan. Another referenced foreclosure proceedings tied to commercial property. I finally understood why they were desperate. Then I found the documents. A thick stack labeled Myers Property. Every nerve in my body went cold. I sat slowly on the edge of the bed and opened the folder. There they were. Copies of the fake lease agreement, power of attorney drafts, financial transfer forms, even typed notes about next legal steps. I flipped through pages rapidly, my heart pounding harder and harder. Then I froze. One document carried the name of the notary public, supposedly verifying my signature. Janice Holloway. That name sounded familiar. Why I stared at it for several seconds before memory hit me. Janice Holloway died 3 years ago. I knew because she attended our church for decades. I even brought food to her memorial service after her cancer diagnosis. A dead notary. My hands started shaking violently again. This wasn't manipulation anymore. This was criminal. Then I noticed something even worse. Several signatures on the documents looked inconsistent. Mine, Ethan's, different pressure patterns, different slants. Vanessa had forged more than one person's name. Suddenly, I heard a car door slam outside. Panic exploded through me. They were back early. I quickly pulled out my phone and snapped photos of every document as fast as possible. Page after page. Contracts, notes, fake signatures, debt records. My breathing became ragged. Downstairs, I heard the front door open. Voices. Vanessa laughing. "Oh my God," I whispered. I shoved the papers back into place hurriedly, nearly dropping several pages in the process. Footsteps entered the house. Closer. I locked the box, shoved the key back into the vase, and rushed toward the hallway, just as footsteps started climbing the stairs. I barely made it into the bathroom before Vanessa appeared upstairs. My entire body froze. I turned on the faucet quickly, pretending to wash my hands while trying desperately to steady my breathing. A moment later, Vanessa knocked lightly on the door. "You okay in there?" Her voice sounded casual. Too casual. "Yes," I answered, praying my voice didn't shake. "Good. We brought lunch." I waited until her footsteps disappeared before collapsing against the bathroom sink. I thought I might actually throw up. Not from fear, from realization. This woman had built an entire system around stealing from me. Calculated. organized, patient. And somehow Ethan was tangled inside it too. When I finally came downstairs, Vanessa was unpacking shopping bags, while Ethan stared blankly at his phone. I studied him carefully now. Did he know about the forged signatures? Did he know Vanessa used a dead notary's name? Or had he simply allowed himself to be dragged so deep into debt and panic that he stopped asking questions? Vanessa looked up and smiled. "You seem better today." "I slept," I replied evenly. "That's good. Stress can affect memory." There it was again, the subtle attack hidden inside concern. But this time I saw it clearly. Every sentence she spoke was strategic, designed to slowly weaken my credibility, to make me doubt myself, to make others doubt me too. I sat quietly at the kitchen table while Vanessa unpacked groceries, and then I noticed something chilling. She wasn't nervous, not even slightly, which meant she believed completely that I had no power left. That belief would become her biggest mistake, because now I had proof. Photos, documents, a dead notary's name, and for the first time since Richard died, I no longer felt helpless. I felt dangerous. Quietly dangerous. That evening, while Vanessa showered upstairs, I slipped outside onto the back porch with Richard's letter in one pocket and Harold Bennett's number in the other. Snow drifted softly across the yard. My fingers shook as I dialed. The phone rang twice. Then a deep, older voice answered. "Harold Bennett speaking." I closed my eyes tightly. "Harold," I whispered, "it's Lori Myers." A pause. Then concern immediately filled his voice. "Lori, what's happened?" I looked through the kitchen window toward the people inside my house, and finally said the words out loud. "I think someone is trying to steal my home." Harold Bennett asked me to meet him the next morning at his office downtown. "Do not discuss this with anyone tonight," he warned firmly over the phone. "And Lori, whatever you do, don't sign a single piece of paper." "I won't. I mean anything, even harmless paperwork." The seriousness in his voice unsettled me deeply. After we hung up, I remained standing on the porch for several minutes, staring through the kitchen window. Vanessa was laughing at something on her phone, while Ethan sat beside her looking hollow and exhausted. They looked like a normal married couple. That was the frightening part. Evil rarely announces itself dramatically. Sometimes it sits at your kitchen table, drinking coffee from mugs you bought. That night, I barely slept again. But this time, the fear felt different. Not helpless. Focused. I spent hours replaying every strange interaction from the past year in my head. Every missing bill, every subtle insult disguised as concern, every conversation about helping me manage things. Once you recognize manipulation, you begin seeing the pattern everywhere. At 9 the next morning, I told Vanessa I was meeting Megan for breakfast. She looked suspicious immediately. "Megan." "Yes?" Vanessa folded laundry slowly while watching me too carefully. "You've seemed very emotional since Thanksgiving. Maybe you should rest today instead." There it was again, always nudging me toward weakness. "I'll be fine," I replied calmly. Ethan entered the kitchen halfway through the conversation. His eyes darted nervously between us. "You going somewhere breakfast?" "With Megan." The fact that both of them repeated her name instantly made my stomach tighten. Why were they so concerned about where I went? "I'm allowed to leave my own house," I said quietly. An uncomfortable silence followed. Then Vanessa smiled tightly. "Of course you are." I drove downtown with both hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers hurt. Harold Bennett's office sat inside one of the oldest brick buildings in Columbus. Richard had used him as an attorney for nearly 30 years. I hadn't seen Harold since Richard's funeral. The moment he opened his office door and saw me, his face fell. "Jesus Christ," he muttered softly. "You look exhausted." That nearly made me cry immediately, because kindness feels overwhelming after prolonged cruelty. Harold guided me into his office and closed the door carefully behind us. He looked older now, more gray hair, deeper wrinkles around his eyes, but his voice remained steady and sharp. "Start from the beginning," he said. So I did everything. The move into the house, the financial control, the missing mail, Thanksgiving dinner, the fake lease agreement, the power of attorney papers, the dead notary. I handed him copies of the photos from Vanessa's lockbox while my hands trembled. Harold studied the documents silently for several minutes. Then his expression changed from concern to anger. Real anger. These idiots, he muttered. My stomach dropped. So, I'm not crazy. Harold looked up sharply. Lori listened to me carefully. You are absolutely not crazy. I nearly broke down from relief hearing someone say the words aloud. He tapped the papers hard with one finger. This is fraud. Serious fraud. The tightness in my chest loosened slightly for the first time in weeks. Harold removed his glasses and leaned back heavily in his chair. Richard was worried something like this could happen someday. I stared at him. He really expected this, not specifically. Harold sighed, but he worried Ethan lacked boundaries. That hurt to hear, even though I already knew it was true. Harold opened a filing cabinet and removed another folder labeled Myers Estate. Richard updated several protections before he died, he explained. The house is fully secured under your ownership. No legitimate transfer could happen without direct legal oversight and multiple verification procedures. So Vanessa's papers mean nothing. They mean prison time if handled correctly. The bluntness shocked me. Harold continued reviewing the documents. The forged notary alone is catastrophic, he said quietly. Using a deceased notary's credentials is incredibly stupid. Do you think Ethan knew Harold didn't answer immediately? That silence told me enough. Finally, he sighed. I think your son is in deep financial trouble and allowed himself to become part of something dangerous. Allowed himself, not forced. That distinction mattered. I looked down at my hands. I keep trying to understand how he could do this. Harold's expression softened slightly. Fear changes people, Lori. Debt, especially. Then his voice hardened again. But fear doesn't excuse criminal behavior. He slid the documents back into the folder carefully. We need to proceed strategically now. What does that mean? It means you pretend nothing has changed. The idea horrified me instantly. You want me to go back there and act normal? Yes. I don't know if I can. You have to. Harold leaned forward. Right now, Vanessa believes you're confused, emotionally unstable, and easy to pressure. That arrogance gives us an advantage. Us. The words steadied me emotionally in ways I didn't expect. For weeks, I had felt isolated inside my own reality. Now, someone finally stood beside me. Harold continued. Do not confront her about the documents. Do not mention the dead notary. Do not accuse anyone directly yet. What if they push me to sign something again? Refuse politely, delay, stall. But don't reveal what you know. He paused before adding carefully, and, Lori, I think it's time we involve someone else. He picked up the office phone and dialed a number from memory. A man answered after 2 rings. Alan, it's Harold Bennett. I need you on a potential financial exploitation case. An hour later, Detective Alan Pierce arrived. He wasn't technically police anymore. Harold explained that Alan specialized in financial investigations involving elder fraud and estate manipulation. Alan looked to be in his early 50s. Calm eyes, quiet voice, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. After reviewing the documents, he frowned deeply. This woman's organized, he said. That sentence chilled me. Alan continued flipping through the pages. These weren't improvised. She built a paper trail slowly over time. Exactly what I feared. He looked toward me carefully. Mrs. Myers has your daughter-in-law isolated you financially? Yes. Restricted access to accounts? Yes. Controlled communication? My stomach tightened. Yes. Alan nodded grimly. This follows a recognizable pattern. The words made me physically cold. Recognizable pattern. Meaning this had happened to other elderly people too? Harold handed Alan copies of Richard's protective documentation. After reviewing them, Alan let out a low whistle. Your husband was smart. I smiled sadly. He always prepared for disasters, and he may have saved you years of litigation. For the first time since Thanksgiving, hope flickered inside me. Small, fragile, but real. Then Alan asked the question I dreaded most. What's your son's involvement level? Silence filled the room. Finally, I whispered the truth. I don't know anymore. Because that was the hardest part. Vanessa terrified me. But Ethan broke my heart. Alan closed the folder carefully. We need more evidence before formal action, he explained. Preferably recordings, additional documentation, or direct coercion attempts. You want me to gather evidence, I want you to stay safe while we build a case. Harold nodded firmly. And Lori, from this moment forward, assume every conversation inside that house matters. I swallowed hard. The weight of what was happening suddenly became terrifyingly real. This wasn't family drama anymore. This was legal, criminal, potentially dangerous. As the meeting ended, Harold placed Richard's handwritten letter back into my hands. Your husband loved you very much, he said quietly. Tears burned behind my eyes immediately. He trusted you to survive this. I looked down at Richard's handwriting, at the careful instructions he left behind, at the warnings he hoped I'd never need. Then I thought about Vanessa smiling across my Thanksgiving table while trying to convince everyone I was confused and helpless. No, I wasn't helpless anymore. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I finally had people helping me fight back. Pretending nothing had changed turned out to be one of the hardest things I had ever done. Every instinct inside me wanted to scream at Vanessa, to throw those fake documents in her face, to demand answers from Ethan until he finally looked at me like a son again instead of a frightened stranger. But Harold and Alan were right. Vanessa only held power as long as she believed I was weak. So I smiled. I drank coffee with her in the mornings. I nodded politely during conversations, and every second of it felt like swallowing poison. 3 days after my meeting with Harold, Vanessa began tightening control around me even more aggressively, almost as if she sensed something shifting. That morning, I tried using my primary credit card at the pharmacy, and it declined again. This time, the cashier quietly told me the account appeared temporarily frozen. Frozen. Humiliation burned through me, while customers in line pretended not to stare. When I returned home, Vanessa acted concerned immediately. Oh no, she gasped. I thought Ethan fixed that already. I stared at her carefully. Why would Ethan need access to my bank accounts? She blinked once, then smiled softly. Because you authorized him months ago. Remember another trap? Another subtle suggestion that my memory couldn't be trusted. I forced myself to stay calm. I'd like direct access restored. Vanessa folded a towel slowly before answering. That might be difficult right now. Why? Because the bank flagged unusual activity. What activity? She hesitated for half a second too long. Then Ethan walked into the kitchen. Mom, we're handling it. Again those words. We're handling it. As though my own finances belonged to them. I looked directly at my son. Handling what exactly? Ethan glanced nervously toward Vanessa before answering. The bank just wants additional verification. For my own account. He rubbed the back of his neck anxiously. Temporary issue. Vanessa stepped in smoothly. We're trying to protect you from fraud, Lori. The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. Protect me from fraud, while actively committing fraud against me. That afternoon, I called the bank privately from the grocery store parking lot. The representative confirmed something horrifying. My contact information had been changed months earlier. Phone numbers, email notifications, even mailing preferences, all rerouted. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my fingers hurt. How was that authorized? I asked shakily. The representative paused. It appears someone listed as an approved financial contact made the request. Approved financial contact, Vanessa, or Ethan. Maybe both. After hanging up, I sat in my car trembling with anger. They hadn't simply planned to pressure me emotionally. They were slowly erasing my independence piece by piece. That evening, Alan called. "How are they behaving?" he asked. "Worse." I explained the frozen accounts and changed contact information. Alan sighed heavily. "That escalation matters." "What does that mean?" "It means they're becoming impatient." The word unsettled me deeply. Impatient people make mistakes, but impatient, desperate people become dangerous. 2 days later, Vanessa introduced a new idea over dinner. "I found a wonderful assisted living community nearby," she said casually while passing mashed potatoes. I nearly dropped my fork. Ethan stared at his plate immediately. "There's a waiting list," Vanessa continued brightly. "But I thought we should plan ahead." Plan ahead. As if my removal from the house was already inevitable. "I'm not moving anywhere," I said quietly. Vanessa smiled sympathetically. "Nobody's forcing anything." The lie floated through the room like smoke. Then she added softly, "But eventually, we all need support." Support. Another weapon disguised as kindness. I noticed Ethan wouldn't look at me again. Shame radiated off him now constantly. Good. Part of me wanted him uncomfortable. I wanted him haunted by what they were doing. Later that night, I overheard another argument upstairs. Their voices carried through the hallway vents. "She's getting suspicious," Ethan whispered harshly. "Then stop acting guilty," Vanessa snapped back. "I don't like this anymore." "You liked it when we were avoiding bankruptcy." Silence followed. Then Vanessa lowered her voice, but I still heard enough. "If we lose this house, we lose everything." The house. Always the house. Not me, not family, not love, just the asset. The next morning, Alan advised me to start documenting conversations directly. How I asked nervously, "Your phone recorder is enough." The idea made me uncomfortable immediately. Secret recordings felt dishonest. Then I remembered Thanksgiving dinner, the fake signatures, the dead notary. My discomfort vanished quickly after that. That afternoon, Vanessa approached me in the living room, carrying another folder. "Can we revisit the financial paperwork?" I quietly activated the voice recorder inside my sweater pocket. My heart pounded so loudly, I worried she might hear it. "I already told you no," I replied. Vanessa sat beside me on the couch with exaggerated patience. Lori refusing to cooperate only makes things harder. For who? For everyone. She opened the folder and slid several pages toward me. I spoke with Cynthia Blake again. She believes shared financial oversight would stabilize the situation. I scanned the papers briefly. More authority transfers, more access permissions, more attempts to control everything Richard and I built. I'm not signing these. Vanessa exhaled slowly, like a mother dealing with a stubborn child. "You're being emotional." "No, I'm being careful." Something flashed across her face then. Anger. Real anger. Gone almost instantly. "You've changed a lot lately," she said quietly. "So have you." Her jaw tightened slightly. Then came the sentence that truly chilled me. "People your age sometimes become paranoid when they're isolated." I stared at her. There it was. The strategy laid bare. Undermined my mental stability slowly until nobody trusted my version of reality. I suddenly realized how dangerous she truly was. Not explosive, calculated, clinical. "I think you should see a doctor," Vanessa continued gently, "just to make sure stress isn't affecting your cognition." Cognition. She sounded like she was already preparing evidence for future hearings. My chest turned cold. Then Ethan walked into the room unexpectedly. He stopped when he saw the papers. "What's going on?" Vanessa answered smoothly. "I'm trying to help your mother understand the importance of planning ahead." Ethan looked exhausted. For a moment, he almost seemed frightened by the scene itself. I looked directly at him. "Do you think I'm mentally unstable?" His eyes widened immediately. "What number?" Vanessa spoke before he could continue. "Nobody said unstable. You implied it." She folded her hands neatly. "I'm concerned about memory issues." I watched Ethan carefully then, waiting, hoping. Finally, he whispered, maybe seeing someone wouldn't hurt. The betrayal of that sentence hurt worse than Thanksgiving, because this wasn't about money anymore. They were preparing to question my competence, legally, emotionally, publicly, and Ethan had just helped her do it. That night, I sat alone in Richard's old office, replaying the recording repeatedly through headphones. Vanessa's voice sounded even colder on playback, more manipulative, more deliberate. Alan was right. Every conversation mattered now. As I sat there listening, another realization slowly settled over me. Vanessa wasn't improvising anymore. She was accelerating. The frozen accounts, the assisted living discussions, the memory concerns, the authority paperwork, everything was moving faster, which meant something else was happening behind the scenes, something urgent, and whatever it was pushing Vanessa toward desperation. 3 days later, Alan Pierce called me just after sunrise. "Can you meet today?" he asked quietly. Something in his tone made my stomach tighten instantly. "Yes, don't tell anyone where you're going." An hour later, I sat inside a small private office behind Harold Bennett's law firm while snow drifted steadily outside the windows. Alan closed the door carefully before sitting across from me. He looked grim. "What happened?" I asked immediately. He slid a thick folder across the desk. We pulled more financial records. My chest tightened. About Ethan Allen nodded slowly. I opened the folder with trembling hands. Credit reports, loan summaries, collection notices, foreclosure documents. The deeper I read, the worse it became. Not $200,000. Closer to $400,000. I physically stopped breathing for a second. Oh my God. Alan leaned back heavily. The commercial investment failed almost 18 months ago. But Ethan said he lied. The word landed hard. Not because I didn't already know my son had lied, because seeing proof of how long it had been happening shattered something inside me. Alan continued carefully. After the investment collapsed, they began borrowing aggressively. Credit cards, personal loans, high-interest lenders. I stared at page after page of debt, luxury purchases, designer stores, travel expenses, private club memberships. Even while drowning financially, Vanessa kept spending. That part enraged me most. Richard and I sacrificed constantly to build security. Vanessa spent like someone playing dress up with money she never earned. Then I noticed something else. Several loan applications carried Ethan's signature beside unfamiliar financial disclosures. "What are these?" Alan's expression darkened. "We believe Vanessa may have altered or falsified parts of Ethan's documentation too." I looked up sharply. She forged his signature too. Possibly. A strange, complicated emotion hit me then. Not relief, not forgiveness, but clarity. Vanessa wasn't merely manipulating Ethan emotionally. She was using him too. Alan folded his hands together. "That doesn't make your son innocent, Lori." "I know." And I did know. Fear might explain Ethan's weakness, but it didn't excuse betraying me. Still, the realization changed things emotionally. I had spent weeks imagining Ethan as an equal partner in the scheme. Now I saw something more tragic. A weak man sinking deeper into disaster while clinging to the loudest voice beside him. Alan pointed toward another page. "There's more." I forced myself to continue reading. A draft property valuation estimate sat near the bottom of the stack. My house. Estimated market value highlighted in yellow. Below it, typed notes read, "Sell immediately after authority transfer." My vision blurred. They already planned to sell it. Not later. Immediately. Everything Richard and I built. Every Christmas, every birthday, every memory, reduced to a liquidation strategy. I pressed trembling fingers against my mouth, trying not to cry. Alan's voice softened slightly. "I'm sorry." I shook my head slowly. "No, I need to see this." Because denial was still dangerous. Part of me kept wanting to believe Ethan would stop this before it went too far. But the evidence kept proving otherwise. Then Alan handed me another document. "This matters most." I stared at the page. It was a loan agreement. Ethan's name appeared multiple times throughout it, but the signature at the bottom looked wrong, different. I knew my son's handwriting. I signed permission slips, school forms, and birthday cards beside that handwriting for decades. This signature was forced, artificial. Alan nodded when he saw my reaction. You noticed. That's not Ethan's signature. No. Cold anger settled deeper inside me. Vanessa forged her own husband's name too, which meant one terrifying thing. Vanessa didn't truly care about anyone except herself. Not Ethan, not me, not family, only survival. And people like that become dangerous when cornered. Alan leaned forward carefully. I need to ask you something difficult. I nodded weakly. If Vanessa believes the house is slipping away from her, how do you think she'll react? The question frightened me more than I expected, because I already knew the answer. Poorly. Very poorly. She'll panic, I admitted quietly. Alan nodded. That's my concern too. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I whispered the question haunting me most. Do you think Ethan knows she forged his signature? Alan considered carefully before answering. No. How can you tell? Because people knowingly committing fraud usually protect themselves better. Your son's behavior suggests confusion, guilt, and fear, not control. Fear. That word again. I thought about Ethan's exhausted face lately, his constant anxiety, his inability to meet my eyes. He looked like a man trapped inside something spiraling beyond his control. But he still chose to stay inside it. That mattered too. Alan continued. Vanessa likely convinced him this was temporary, necessary, fixable. I closed my eyes briefly. Richard used to say Ethan could drown while convincing himself the water wasn't deep. Now I understood exactly what he meant. Harold entered the office a few minutes later carrying coffee cups. One glance at my face told him everything. You saw the numbers? I nodded silently. Harold sat beside me carefully. Lori, none of this changes what they've done. I know, but it may explain why the pressure escalated so quickly. I stared out the window at falling snow. They were desperate. Yes, desperate enough to erase me. That realization hurt in ways I couldn't fully describe. Because motherhood leaves permanent openings in your heart. Even after betrayal, part of you still searches for excuses to protect your child emotionally. I hated that part of myself. Harold placed another document gently onto the desk. This came from Alan's investigation too. It was an email printout. Vanessa writing to a real estate contact. Potential fast sale after ownership transition finalized. Preferred quick close. My pulse hammered violently. She already had buyers lined up. I suddenly imagined strangers walking through my kitchen, while Richard's memories still lived inside those walls. The thought made me physically sick. No, I whispered. Harold looked at me steadily. That's why we stopped this now. Something hardened inside me then. Not bitterness, resolve. Vanessa thought I was weak because I cried easily and trusted deeply. But surviving grief changes you. Losing Richard nearly destroyed me already. And once someone survives that kind of pain, fear loses some of its power. Alan interrupted my thoughts quietly. There's another thing. I looked up. We may need Ethan to turn against Vanessa eventually. I almost laughed from disbelief. My son can barely look me in the eyes, because guilt is eating him alive. Alan leaned forward slightly. That matters. I thought about Ethan standing outside my bedroom weeks earlier, looking terrified and exhausted. Not proud, not triumphant, terrified. What if he never chooses me? I whispered. Harold answered gently. Then we protect you anyway. The simplicity of that sentence nearly made me cry again. Protect you anyway. No conditions, no manipulation, just protection. I had forgotten what that felt like. Before leaving, Alan gave me specific instructions. Continue recording conversations. Do not confront Vanessa. Delay every legal or financial request. And most importantly, watch for escalation. What does escalation look like? I asked quietly. Alan's expression turned grim. Isolation, medical evaluations, emergency authority requests, attempts to portray you as unstable. My stomach dropped. That was exactly what Vanessa had already started doing, which meant one terrible truth. She was moving faster than we realized. That evening when I returned home, Vanessa greeted me with unusual warmth. Too warm. "How was breakfast with Megan?" she asked casually. I looked directly into her eyes, and for the first time, I stopped feeling intimidated because now I knew something important she didn't. Her entire plan was beginning to crack beneath the weight of its own lies. She just hadn't realized it yet. 2 nights later, Vanessa finally made her move. I knew it the moment she walked into the living room, carrying a bottle of red wine and wearing the smile she reserved for manipulation. The polished smile, the careful smile, the one that never reached her eyes. I was thinking she said lightly, "Maybe we should all sit down tomorrow and clear the air." I looked up slowly from Richard's old armchair. Clear the air. Yes. She sat gracefully across from me. No tension, no misunderstandings, just a productive family conversation. Family. That word sounded almost grotesque coming from her now. Still, I kept my face calm. What kind of conversation? Vanessa poured herself wine before answering. "Cynthia Blake is available tomorrow afternoon. We could review some financial options together." There it was. Another meeting, another attempt. I noticed Ethan standing quietly near the hallway listening. His shoulders immediately tightened when Vanessa mentioned Cynthia's name. Good. He knew something bad was coming too. Vanessa continued smoothly. "If we can resolve everything cooperatively, nobody has to involve attorneys or courts." The sentence was carefully chosen, a threat disguised as compromise. I lowered my eyes, thoughtfully pretending uncertainty. Inside, my pulse hammered violently. This was the escalation Alan warned me about. And suddenly I understood why it was happening now. Vanessa was running out of time. The debts, the loans, the potential buyers, everything was collapsing around her, which meant she needed my signature immediately. I took a slow breath, then quietly said the words Harold instructed me to say if this moment came. "Maybe you're right." Vanessa froze briefly, not visibly enough for most people to notice. But I noticed. Surprise flashed across her face before she quickly masked it with relief. "I think that's very wise, Lori." Beside the hallway, Ethan looked confused. I continued carefully. "I'm tired of fighting. That part wasn't entirely a lie." Vanessa leaned forward slightly. "Then let's solve this together." I nodded slowly. "Tomorrow." The second she left the room, I felt sick. Pretending submission was harder than pretending confusion ever had been. Later that night, I locked myself in Richard's office and called Harold immediately. "She took the bait," he said, after listening carefully. Alan joined the call minutes later. "We'll set everything up," he assured me. "What exactly happens tomorrow?" I asked nervously. Harold's voice turned firm. "You let Vanessa talk. And if she pushes documents at me, you delay until we arrive." My stomach twisted. "You're sure this is enough evidence?" Alan answered quietly. "Lori, we have forged signatures, false authority documents, illegal financial manipulation, and evidence of attempted property transfer. We're beyond suspicion now." I looked around Richard's office while gripping the phone tightly. The old wooden shelves, the framed family photos, the life built inside these walls. Tomorrow could decide everything. That realization terrified me. The next afternoon arrived painfully slowly. Vanessa transformed the dining room into something that looked halfway between a legal consultation and a hostage negotiation. Folders stacked neatly, pens arranged perfectly, coffee prepared. Even Cynthia Blake returned wearing another expensive navy suit and carrying a leather portfolio. I noticed immediately that Cynthia seemed more nervous this time. Interesting. Maybe she finally sensed how dangerous this situation truly was. Ethan looked pale before the meeting even started. He barely spoke during lunch. At one point, I caught him staring at me with something close to guilt-filled panic. For a brief second, I almost pitied him. Then I remembered Thanksgiving, the fake signatures, the assisted living threats, and my sympathy hardened again. At 2 o'clock, sharp Vanessa called everyone into the dining room. "Let's just handle this calmly," she said brightly. I sat down slowly while secretly activating the recording app inside my sweater pocket again. My hands felt cold, not weak, focused. Cynthia opened her portfolio and spread several documents neatly across the table. "These are revised agreements," she explained carefully, "designed to simplify financial management and reduce conflict." Reduce conflict, meaning surrender quietly. Vanessa pushed the top document toward me. "We made adjustments to make you more comfortable." I scanned the first page briefly. Power of attorney, shared property authority, emergency medical decision rights. My stomach turned. She wanted everything, not just the house. Control, total control. Vanessa folded her hands politely. "If you sign today, we can move forward peacefully." Peacefully, as though she hadn't spent months psychologically dismantling me. I looked toward Ethan. "Did you read all these?" His jaw tightened. Mostly. Mostly. Vanessa immediately interrupted. "We already discussed everything privately." No, she discussed things. Ethan obeyed them. That distinction mattered. I picked up one page slowly. "This says you'd gain authority over my accounts immediately." Vanessa smiled patiently. "Temporarily. And this one allows property decisions without direct approval from me." That's standard protection language. Protection. Always protection. I looked toward Cynthia. "Is this really standard?" Cynthia hesitated. "Too long," Vanessa answered before she could. "Completely." The room felt unbearably tense now. I noticed sweat gathering near Ethan's temples. Good. Let him feel pressure for once. Vanessa slid a pen toward me gently. "We all want what's best for you, Lori." The performance would have impressed me months earlier. Now it made me sick. I picked up the pen slowly. Vanessa's eyes brightened immediately. There it is, I thought. That hunger. Not concern. Victory. I lowered my gaze toward the paperwork deliberately. "Before I sign," I whispered carefully, "I just need reassurance." Vanessa softened her voice instantly. "Of course. You promise I won't lose my home?" Her answer came too fast. "Absolutely not." Lie. I had already seen the property sale emails. I looked toward Ethan again. "You promised too." He swallowed hard. "Mom," Vanessa cut in sharply, "Ethan and I are trying to save this family." No. She was trying to save herself. I let silence stretch painfully across the room, then finally whispered, "I'm scared." That sentence changed everything. Vanessa relaxed visibly. Completely. She thought she had won. And arrogant people become careless right before they fall. Her tone softened almost maternally. "I know change is frightening, but you're not capable of managing all this stress alone anymore." There it was. Direct now, not implied, not subtle, incapable. I lowered my eyes, pretending emotional exhaustion. "What happens after I sign?" Vanessa answered calmly. "We stabilize the finances, list the property eventually, and transition everyone into healthier arrangements. List the property." There it was, spoken aloud. Ethan's head snapped toward her instantly. What Vanessa froze. Too late. The room went silent. I looked slowly toward Ethan. "You didn't know." His face went completely pale. "You said—" He turned toward Vanessa in disbelief. "You said the house wasn't being sold immediately." Vanessa recovered fast. Ethan calmed down. "No, wait. It's strategic timing. We discussed this." "No," Ethan whispered. "You said we were protecting her." For the first time since this nightmare began, I watched genuine fear flicker across Vanessa's face. Not fear of me. Fear of losing control over Ethan. Interesting. Very interesting. I carefully set the pen down. I think I said quietly before anyone signs anything else. I glanced toward the front door. We should let the attorneys join us. Vanessa's expression changed instantly. Sharp, cold, dangerous. What attorneys? And right then, someone knocked at the front door. The knock at the front door echoed through the house like a gunshot. Nobody moved at first. Vanessa stared at me with open suspicion, now all traces of warmth stripped from her face. What attorneys? She repeated slowly. I stood up carefully from the dining table. My attorneys. For the first time since Thanksgiving dinner, I watched genuine panic flicker across Vanessa's eyes. Not irritation, not frustration, fear. Real fear. Ethan looked completely lost. You hired attorneys, he whispered. Before I could answer, Harold Bennett stepped through the front doorway, followed by Alan Pierce, carrying a thick leather case. The atmosphere inside the house changed instantly. Vanessa rose from her chair so abruptly it nearly tipped backward. What is this? She snapped. Harold removed his coat calmly. This, he replied evenly, is legal representation for Mrs. Lori Myers. Cynthia Blake went pale the moment she saw Harold. Interesting. Apparently she recognized him. Alan quietly closed the front door behind them. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Vanessa laughed. Actually laughed. A sharp, artificial sound full of nervous arrogance. This is ridiculous, she said. We're having a private family discussion. Harold looked around the dining room slowly. At the folders, the documents, the unsigned authority papers. Then his eyes settled on Vanessa. A family discussion involving fraudulent legal instruments and attempted financial exploitation. The silence afterward felt suffocating. Ethan looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. Vanessa recovered first. You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. Alan calmly opened his leather case and removed copies of the forged documents. Actually, he said quietly, we have a very clear idea. Cynthia immediately stood up. I think perhaps I should leave. No, Harold replied firmly. You should stay. Cynthia froze. Harold placed several papers onto the table one by one. The lease agreement presented at Thanksgiving contains forged signatures. Vanessa crossed her arms instantly. That's a lie. The notarization references Janice Holloway. Vanessa said nothing. Harold's voice hardened. Janice Holloway has been deceased for 3 years. That hit the room like an explosion. Ethan physically turned toward Vanessa in shock. What? Vanessa's face lost color briefly. Only briefly. Then anger replaced it. You're twisting facts. Alan slid another document forward. We also identified inconsistencies in multiple signatures, including Mr. Ethan Myers' name on loan documentation. Ethan grabbed the papers immediately. What loan documents? Vanessa moved fast. Too fast. She reached for the papers before Ethan could fully read them. Alan stopped her calmly. Don't. The authority in his voice froze everyone. Ethan stared down at the signatures with growing horror. That's not my handwriting. Vanessa immediately shifted strategies. Ethan, listened to me. No, he snapped suddenly. What is this? For the first time in months, I saw something break inside my son. Not weakness. Illusion. He finally realized he had not been controlling this situation. He had been used by it. Vanessa stood straighter now, her polished mask cracking visibly. I did what I had to do for us. For us, Ethan stared at her in disbelief. You forged my name. You said you trusted me. That's not permission to commit crimes. The room erupted all at once after that. Voices overlapping, Cynthia demanding clarification, Ethan shouting questions, Vanessa trying desperately to regain control. Through it all, I remained seated quietly at the end of the table, watching. Because suddenly, I understood something important. Vanessa's power had never come from intelligence alone. It came from controlling the emotional temperature in every room. The moment chaos replaced control, she started unraveling. Harold turned toward Cynthia Blake carefully. Ms. Blake, were you aware these documents contained fraudulent signatures? Cynthia looked horrified. Absolutely not. Were you aware Mrs. Myers was allegedly suffering cognitive decline while simultaneously signing complex legal agreements? Cynthia's expression shifted instantly. Fear. Professional fear. She realized her own career might now be connected to this disaster. I was told the family already had verbal agreements in place, she stammered. Harold nodded slowly. I suggest you obtain independent legal counsel immediately. Cynthia grabbed her portfolio with shaking hands. Vanessa glared at her furiously. Don't overreact. Cynthia looked at her like she was seeing her clearly for the first time. You told me these documents were legitimate. They are legitimate. No, Alan interrupted calmly. They are not. He pulled out another folder. Mrs. Myers documented unauthorized financial control account, access manipulation, attempted coercion, and recorded conversations regarding competency concerns. Vanessa's head snapped toward me. You recorded me? I finally spoke. Yes. The look on her face then was unforgettable. Pure betrayal. As though she was the victim somehow. You sneaky old woman. The insult slipped out before she could stop herself. The entire room went dead silent. Even Ethan looked stunned. There it was, the real Vanessa. No sweetness, no concern, no careful mask, just contempt. And once people reveal who they truly are, they rarely manage to hide it again. Harold's expression hardened immediately. Thank you, he said calmly. That statement alone was useful. Vanessa realized her mistake instantly. You're setting me up? No, I replied quietly. You set yourself up. Ethan looked completely shattered now. He turned slowly toward Vanessa. You told me we were helping my mother. Vanessa laughed bitterly. Oh, please. Your mother lives in a $500,000 house while we drown. That doesn't give you the right to steal it. We weren't stealing. You forged signatures. You would have signed eventually anyway. The confession slipped out before she realized what she said. The room froze again. Alan spoke carefully. Would you like to repeat that statement? Vanessa immediately stepped backward. No. I want all of you out of this house. I stood slowly then. My house. Those two words carried more strength than I expected. Vanessa looked at me with open hatred now. No pretending anymore. No wonder Ethan's father always treated you like a child, she snapped viciously. You can barely function without someone protecting you. The insult landed hard, but strangely, it no longer wounded me, because now I finally saw the truth clearly. Vanessa attacked weakness because she depended on controlling it, and she had just lost control completely. Ethan stared at her like he no longer recognized the woman he married. You lied to me. Vanessa rolled her eyes sharply. Oh, grow up, Ethan. We were trying to survive. No, he whispered. You were trying to take everything. Alan closed his folder calmly. At this point, formal investigations regarding fraud and financial exploitation are highly likely. Vanessa's confidence finally cracked completely then. You can't prove intent. Harold looked almost offended. We have forged legal instruments, false notarization, recorded coercion attempts, manipulated banking access, and documented plans to sell the property after authority transfer. Silence. Then Harold added quietly, yes, we can. For the first time since Richard died, I watched fear overpower Vanessa's arrogance. Real fear. She looked around the room desperately searching for support. Cynthia avoided eye contact entirely. Alan remained expressionless. Harold looked furious. And Ethan looked broken. Not angry anymore. Broken. Finally, he turned toward me slowly. Tears filled his eyes. Mom, I held up my hand gently. Not yet. Because forgiveness and accountability are not the same thing. Vanessa grabbed her purse suddenly. This is insane. Alan's voice stopped her cold. I strongly advise against destroying records, electronic devices, or financial documentation. She froze, then slowly lowered the purse again. and for the first time since Thanksgiving dinner, the predator in my house no longer looked powerful. She looked trapped. The house felt strangely quiet after Harold and Alan left. Not peaceful, just hollow. Like a storm had ripped through every room and taken something invisible with it. Vanessa locked herself inside the guest bedroom she had turned into her office. I heard drawers slamming, footsteps, pacing, muffled phone calls filled with panic. For the first time since she moved into my home, she sounded afraid. Good. Ethan sat alone at the dining table long after everyone else disappeared. The same table where Richard once helped him with math homework. The same table where we celebrated birthdays and graduations. Now, it held the wreckage of our family. I stood silently in the kitchen for several minutes, watching my son from a distance. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically, emotionally. Like all the lies and excuses holding him upright had finally collapsed. Eventually he spoke without looking at me. I didn't know she forged my signature. His voice sounded raw, exhausted. I stayed where I was. You still helped her pressure me? He closed his eyes immediately. I know. You still sat there while she tried convincing everyone I was losing my mind. His shoulders tightened painfully. I know. And you still let her talk about putting me into assisted living. That one nearly destroyed him. He lowered his head into his hands. I know. Silence filled the kitchen again. Part of me wanted to scream. Another part wanted to hold him the way I did when he was little and frightened after nightmares. Motherhood is cruel that way. Even after betrayal, love doesn't disappear cleanly. It just hurts differently. Finally, Ethan looked up at me with tears in his eyes. I'm sorry. I stared at him for a very long time, because those were the words I thought I wanted, the words I waited weeks to hear. But standing there in my kitchen, I realized something terrible. An apology does not erase fear, and I had been afraid inside my own home. Afraid to check my bank account, afraid to open my mail, afraid my own son might help someone take everything from me. No apology could undo that. I believe you're sorry, I said quietly. His face crumpled immediately with relief. Then I continued, but that doesn't mean I trust you. The relief vanished instantly. Good. Truth should hurt sometimes. Upstairs, a door slammed hard enough to shake the hallway. Vanessa. Ethan flinched automatically at the sound. That tiny reaction told me more than words ever could. He had been living under her emotional control for a long time. Still, he chose it. I sat slowly across from him at the dining table. When did it start? His eyes filled again. After the investment failed. How bad was it? Worse than I told you. I already knew that from Alan's investigation, but I needed to hear Ethan say it himself. At first we thought we could recover, he whispered. Then more debt piled up. Vanessa kept saying if we could just stabilize things temporarily. The house. He nodded weakly. She said nobody would really get hurt. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Nobody gets hurt while stealing an old woman's home? The denial sounded pathetic now. She said we'd take care of you afterward, Ethan continued shakily. She promised you'd still live comfortably. Comfortably. Like a pet relocated after a move. Tears burned behind my eyes again, but I forced them back. Your father died believing this home would protect me someday. Ethan broke completely then. He covered his face and started crying hard. Not quiet tears. Broken sobs. I know, he whispered repeatedly. I know. And strangely, watching him collapse didn't bring satisfaction, only sadness. Because this wasn't the son Richard and I raised. This was what fear, weakness, and manipulation had turned him into. After a while, Ethan finally whispered something else. She's going to blame everything on me. I looked toward the staircase silently. She already has. His face twisted painfully. I didn't think it would go this far, but it did. Another silence. Then I said the words I had been dreading for days. You can't stay here anymore. Ethan stared at me like he'd been struck. What? You heard me. Mom, please. No. For the first time since Thanksgiving, my voice carried real authority. Not anger, strength. This house is no longer safe for me while either of you live here. He looked devastated. Where am I supposed to go? The question nearly shattered me emotionally, because I remembered carrying this boy into the house as a newborn, teaching him to ride a bike in the driveway, holding him after his first heartbreak. And now I was telling him to leave. But boundaries are painful sometimes. Necessary things often are. You're 42 years old, Ethan. He cried quietly again. I made terrible mistakes. Yes, you did. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did. That truth finally settled between us fully then. No excuses left, no illusions, just consequences. A few minutes later, Vanessa came downstairs carrying 2 packed suitcases. The sight almost stunned me. She moved quickly now, all polished confidence gone. Her makeup was smudged. Her hands shook slightly. You happy now? She snapped at me. I looked at her calmly. No. That answer seemed to confuse her, because Vanessa understood victory and defeat, not grief. She scoffed bitterly. You turned Ethan against me. No, I replied quietly. You did that yourself. Ethan didn't defend her. That seemed to wound her more than anything else. She turned toward him sharply. You're really letting them manipulate you. He looked exhausted. You forged my signature. I was trying to save us. You lied to me. Vanessa laughed harshly. Oh, please. You knew exactly what we were doing. Ethan flinched hard, because part of that was true, and we all knew it. Vanessa suddenly turned back toward me with tears filling her eyes. Real tears this time. You think you've won something? She whispered angrily. You destroyed your own son. The accusation hit hard, hard enough that for one dangerous second, guilt almost broke through my resolve. Then I remembered Thanksgiving dinner. The forged documents, the threats, the manipulation, and I steadied myself again. No, I said softly. You destroyed the version of my son that existed before all this. Silence. Vanessa grabbed her suitcase handle violently. You self-righteous old woman. Ethan closed his eyes painfully. Even now, she couldn't stop herself from cruelty. As she headed toward the front door, she suddenly turned one last time. You'll end up alone in this house. The words echoed through the hallway, and maybe months earlier they would have destroyed me, but not now, because loneliness and peace are not the same thing. I looked directly at her. I'd rather be alone than afraid. For the first time since meeting her, Vanessa had no response. She simply stared at me, then left. The front door slammed behind her hard enough to rattle the walls. Ethan remained standing in the hallway, looking completely broken. Finally, he whispered, Can I at least come back for my things later? I nodded slowly. Call first. The formality of that sentence nearly made him cry again. But it mattered. Boundaries mattered now. He picked up a small overnight bag silently, then stopped near the doorway. Mom, I looked at him. I really am sorry. This time I believed him completely, and somehow that made everything hurt even more. The first night alone in the house felt strangely unfamiliar, not because the rooms were empty, because they were finally honest again. No whispered conversations upstairs, no fake concern wrapped around manipulation, no tension waiting behind every interaction. Just silence. Real silence. I sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, with a cup of tea growing cold between my hands, while snow drifted quietly outside the windows. For the first time in months, I could breathe fully inside my own home. And yet, peace didn't arrive immediately. People think survival feels triumphant in the beginning. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes survival just feels exhausting. The weeks after Vanessa and Ethan left were filled with lawyers, paperwork, financial recovery, and emotional wreckage. Alan Pierce helped document everything formally. Harold guided me through restoring my banking access, correcting account permissions, and protecting the property legally from future tampering. The investigation into Vanessa's forged documents moved faster than expected. Apparently, using the name of a deceased notary tends to attract serious attention. Cynthia Blake cooperated almost immediately after obtaining her own attorney. According to Harold, she provided emails and communication records proving Vanessa deliberately misrepresented the legality of the paperwork. That mattered. A lot. Vanessa tried denying responsibility at first. Then she tried blaming Ethan. Then she tried claiming emotional stress impaired her judgment. But evidence has a cruel way of surviving excuses, especially when someone leaves a digital trail behind. As for Ethan, he disappeared for nearly 3 weeks after leaving the house. No calls, no texts, nothing. Part of me worried constantly, despite everything. That's motherhood again. Even when your heart breaks, concern keeps breathing underneath it. Then one rainy Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. Ethan. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. Hello? His voice sounded different somehow. Quieter. I started therapy. The sentence caught me completely off guard. Oh, another pause. I should have done it years ago. I didn't know what to say to that, because part of me was proud he finally sought help. Another part of me was furious it took destroying our family first. I'm staying with a friend outside Dayton, he continued softly. I got a temporary job. That's good. I sold my truck. I closed my eyes briefly. Richard bought Ethan that truck after college. Another casualty. I'm trying to fix things, he whispered. That sentence hurt almost more than the betrayal itself. Because finally, my son sounded like a grown man instead of a frightened child hiding behind Vanessa. Still, healing doesn't happen because someone suddenly says the right words. Trust rebuilds slowly, painfully, brick by brick. I hope you keep trying, I said quietly. He started crying softly then. I don't expect forgiveness yet. No, not yet. But for the first time in a very long while, I believed he understood the damage. That mattered. Over the following months, I slowly reclaimed my life. Piece by piece. I changed every password, every bank authorization, every legal contact. I repainted the guest room Vanessa once used as her office, soft, pale blue. Then I donated nearly all the furniture she left behind. The room smelled cleaner afterward, lighter somehow, like the house itself was finally healing too. One Sunday morning, I walked downstairs and realized something surprising. I no longer felt afraid opening my own mailbox. That tiny moment nearly made me cry. Because people don't realize how deeply control wounds you until freedom returns. Harold visited often during those months, mostly for paperwork at first, eventually just for coffee and conversation. One afternoon, while helping reorganize Richard's office, he held up one of Richard's old handwritten notes and smiled sadly. That man prepared for every disaster except his own death. I laughed softly through tears. That sounds exactly like him. Together, we converted Richard's office into something new. Not a shrine, not a graveyard of memories. A living room for me again. I added plants near the windows, replaced the heavy filing cabinets with bookshelves, framed old photographs instead of hiding them in drawers. And on the desk beside the window, I placed Richard's final letter inside a small wooden frame, not as a reminder of fear, as a reminder of love, because even after death, he protected me. That realization became strangely comforting instead of painful. Around springtime, Megan invited me to a local support group for older women dealing with financial abuse by family members. At first, I resisted. I didn't want to sit in a room discussing humiliation. Then I attended one meeting and listened to stories that sounded horrifyingly familiar. Adult children manipulating parents financially, isolation, control, threats disguised as concern, women doubting their own memories because someone slowly convinced them they were confused. I wasn't alone. That truth changed something inside me permanently. A few months later, with Harold's help, I used a small portion of Richard's savings to establish a local support fund for elderly victims of family financial exploitation. Nothing enormous, just enough to help women access emergency legal advice before things became irreversible. I named it the Richard Myers Family Protection Fund. Because that's exactly what Richard tried to do. Protect family, even imperfect family. By the following Thanksgiving, the house felt completely different. Smaller gathering, quieter, real. Megan came over early with sweet potato casserole. Harold joined us for dinner too, after threatening to burn instant mashed potatoes if left alone at home. For the first time in years, laughter inside the house sounded natural instead of forced. Before dinner, I paused beside Richard's empty chair. I still kept it there. Not because I couldn't move on, because some loves deserve permanent space at the table. Megan squeezed my hand gently. You okay? I smiled softly. Yes. And for once it was true. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. Happy Thanksgiving, Mom. I love you. I'm sorry for all of it. I stared at the text for a very long time, then finally typed back, I love you too. Keep becoming better. Not forgiveness, not yet. But maybe someday. Because healing doesn't mean pretending terrible things never happened. Healing means refusing to let those things destroy every remaining piece of your life. And after everything Vanessa tried to take from me, that house no longer represented fear. It represented survival. After everything that happened, I learned something I wish more women my age understood. Growing older does not make you weak. Being kind does not make you foolish. And loving your family does not mean surrendering your dignity, your safety, or your voice. For a long time, I believed setting boundaries meant I was failing as a mother. I thought saying no to my son would make me cruel. But sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's destruction, even when that person is your own child. What happened to me began slowly: a missing piece of mail, a changed password, a helpful conversation about finances. That's how control often enters people's lives. Quietly, politely, wrapped in concern. Please trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Ask questions. Read every document carefully. Protect your independence. And most importantly, never let anyone convince you that your age makes your thoughts less valuable. I also learned forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. I may forgive Ethan one day completely. In many ways, I already have started trying. But forgiveness does not erase consequences. And healing sometimes requires distance, honesty therapy, and accountability before relationships can ever become healthy again. As for Vanessa, I no longer carry hatred for her. Hatred keeps people emotionally tied to pain. I simply understand now that some people will sacrifice anyone to protect themselves from failure. And that is exactly why boundaries matter. If this story touched you in any way, I'd truly love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted? Do you believe family should always be forgiven? Or are there moments when protecting yourself has to come first? And if you enjoyed this emotional family drama, please like and subscribe. Your support means more than you know. Also tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I always love reading your messages before bed.